we get $1.50 back. Yes?
He said he's going to run the traps, though, to see if it works.
Well, he's kind of saying, like I'm saying, certainly for this 3 months, this definitely should not be paid for. If they can come up with some...
known by code words, income inequality, which means different things to different people. But he also talked about the very important aspect of that, and that is upward income mobility. In other words, we want to make sure that somebody who goes to work in a restaurant, bussing tables, can work their way up the income ladder and education ladder to whether they can actually own their own restaurant and create more jobs and opportunity for other people. But the President called these the, quote, defining challenge of our time. Well, the timing coming as it has, one might be forgiven from wondering whether the President and his allies want to change the subject from Obamacare. We know that the rollout of Obamacare has been an unmitigated disaster, and frankly, there's more to come. And certainly the President, we can understand why he might want to change the subject, but while he is changing the subject, I think Republicans should embrace the challenge of discussing what are the policies that have resulted in income inequality and insufficient upward mobility when it comes to jobs in America. Of course, the President, you might predict, has talked about his proposed solutions, which are creating more government programs and more spending, including up to $6 billion of money that we have to borrow from China and our other creditors just to extend the unemployment insurance program by 3 months. My question is, what happens after that 3 months? Well, I don't want to be rash, but I'll make a prediction that the Democrats will say, well, we need another 3 months. After that, we need another 3 months. And before you know it, unemployment insurance has been extended beyond the half year, which is the basic program, to another full year beyond that at a cost of $25 billion. Just to put all this in context, the federal government spent $250 billion for extended unemployment insurance benefits since 2008. But, of course, the President did not mention some of the primary causes for income inequality and the loss of upward mobility, because a lot of those he is responsible for, along with his allies. He failed to mention that America has suffered the longest period of high unemployment since the Great Depression under his administration. And he failed to mention his signature health care law. I mentioned that a moment ago, trying to pivot to another subject, but we find ourselves inevitably coming back to Obamacare and its negative impact on job creation and a 40-hour work week. So we know that Obamacare has done a number of things in the short period of time since it began the rollout, which was October the 1st. Millions of people have lost their existing insurance coverage. In fact, more people have lost their insurance coverage that have signed up for Obamacare or even Medicaid. And then there is the issue of skyrocketing insurance premiums. So I thought the idea was, how do we make health care more affordable when, in fact, instead of making it better and more affordable, it's made it less affordable? And we're not just talking about the insurance premiums, we're talking about deductibles. We've all heard these stories of people signing up on the Obamacare exchanges only to find out, yeah, they've got health insurance, but you know what? The first $5,000 per person is the deductible, which means you're effectively, for all practical purposes, self-insured. Well, that's a deal breaker for many hardworking middle-class Americans. And then, of course, we know that even organized labor has complained about the fact that Obamacare has turned full-time work into part-time work. Why is that? Well, for employers who put their employees on a 30-hour work week, they're not required under the law to pay for the health care benefits. But if you have a full-time worker, you are. So what's happening is many employers are cutting people back to 30 hours from 40 hours with a commensurate loss of income. I was in Tyler, Texas recently, sitting around a table at a restaurant where one gentleman who owns a restaurant said one of the single moms that works in his restaurant, because of Obamacare, she lost her 40-hour workweek job. He had to cut her down to 30 hours, so she had to get 2 30-hour jobs in order to get by. In other words, she now has to work 60 hours instead of working the 40 hours, and obviously she's worried about the lack of time she has with her children, in addition to having lost her full-time job. But the President has also failed to mention a number of other items which have contributed to income inequality and the loss of upward mobility. Things like the medical device tax that is a feature of Obamacare. Now, in Texas, we've got a number of medical device companies who came to see me after the Obamacare legislation passed, and they said, we have a duty to our shareholders not to spend their money inefficiently. And so our only alternative is to expand our existing facility in Costa Rica rather than in Texas. So the jobs that would have been created in Texas move effectively to Costa Rica because of the medical device tax. So much for job creation and reducing income inequality and enhancing upward mobility. Well, the President also declined to talk about his refusal to approve the Keystone XL pipeline. And of course, this is a pipeline that would start in Canada and end up in Port Arthur, Texas, in an area we call the Golden Triangle, where we happen to have a lot of refineries that can refine that into gasoline, jet fuel, and other products for American consumers. Well, the President promised the country, that he would make a decision by the end of 2013. Well, I may have missed something during the holidays, but I don't recall that the President made any announcement whatsoever on the Keystone XL pipeline. And not only would it produce thousands of good, well-paying jobs, it would also produce a dependable supply of energy from a friendly country, the nation of Canada. What else did the President fail to mention in his income inequality and upward mobility speech? Well, he failed to mention the impact of his regulatory policies have piled hundreds of billions of dollars of additional costs on American businesses. The small banks, for example, in Texas, tell me that said, yeah, we've hired new people, but the people we've hired are the ones that help us comply with the Dodd-Frank regulations. This was a bill, to remind everybody, that was filed to deal with the abuses on Wall Street that led to the subprime loan crisis and the collapse in 2008. But as we now know, that while Wall Street was the target of Dodd-Frank and these regulations, Main Street is the collateral damage. And yes, people are being hired, but not for the purpose of loaning more money and helping small businesses start and grow their business, but rather just to comply with new government regulations. Well, what else did the President fail to mention in his discussion about lack of jobs and upward mobility? Well, he failed to mention his proposed greenhouse gas rules, which will kill jobs and drive up energy costs. He failed to mention that during the so-called Obama economic recovery, the President's now been President for 5 years. He can't blame this on George Bush anymore. But during the so-called Obama economic recovery, real median household income has fallen more than $2,500. So at the same time that real household median income has fallen by $2,500, households are finding their health care insurance costs have gone up by $2,500 for a net loss of $5,000 for most hardworking American families. $5,000. And the President has failed to acknowledge in his discussion of slow economic growth, high unemployment, he's failed to mention that the economic recovery following the 2008 recession has been the weakest U.S. recovery since World War II. Economists ordinarily say that after a recession there'll be sort of a V-shaped recovery, where there'll be, once you hit the bottom, you begin to come out of it very quickly. The economy grows fast. Well, under the Obama recovery, that has been flatlined to anemic growth, which is not fast enough, is not strong enough to hire more American workers. And indeed, we have the lowest percentage of Americans actually in the workforce since in the last 30 years. What that means is even though the unemployment rate is roughly 7%, that's on a national basis, that millions of people have simply dropped out of looking for a job because they see the prospects for finding work so dim. Well, the President also failed to mention that his 2009 stimulus package, you remember Speaker Pelosi at the time said, well, our goal is to make timely, targeted, and temporary investments in government spending to help stimulate the economy, help bring down the unemployment rate. The President later joked that he said, we found out, it wasn't a funny joke, but he later joked, he said, we found out that shovel-ready didn't actually mean it was shovel-ready, which is absolutely true. But he failed to mention his 2009 stimulus package added more than $1 trillion to the national debt, which now stands at $17.3 trillion, equivalent to more than $54,000 of debt for every man, woman, and child living in America today. I don't think anyone in their right mind believes we can continue down this same path of racking up more and more debt by borrowing more and more money without having some negative consequences at some point in the future. The one that we know will occur is that the present generation that's racking up all this debt will probably not be around to have to pay it back. But the next generation and beyond will. Well, if the President wants to have an honest debate about income inequality, he needs to be honest about his own record, and he needs to talk about it in the holistic context. A few months ago, the New York Times reported that the trend of rising inequality, quote, appears to have accelerated during the Obama administration, close quote. Indeed, according to one measure of the income gap, inequality has increased about 4 times faster under President Obama than it did under President George W. Bush. Here's the reality. If we want to reduce income inequality, we need to boost economic growth. That's the debate we should be having, in which this side of the aisle embraces. Not how can we pay more government benefits to people who can't find work or artificially fix the price of wages. We need to figure a way to benefit the entire country by growing the economy. And largely, at least where I come from, people say there's 3 things that the federal government can do to help grow the economy. Get out of the way, get off our back, and get your hand out of our pocket. Those are 3 things the federal government could do which would help the economy grow and create more opportunity and deal with this issue of income inequality in an effective sort of way. Well, so we need to boost economic growth. That's the debate we should be having about how do we create more jobs, or actually how do we allow the private sector to create more jobs. We tried having the government spend borrowed money to create more jobs, and that didn't turn out so well. So now we need to figure a way to get out of the way so the private sector economy can create the jobs that will put Americans back to work and deal with this issue of income inequality once and for all. Well, as we saw last night, instead of trying to actually solve the problem, sometimes I'm tempted to think that the majority leader and his allies really want a political issue rather than a solution to the problem. Because we saw last night the majority leader was ready to have a vote with 17 senators missing because of the storms around the country. We know that people couldn't get back because of cold weather and storms and flight cancellations and the like. And I predict that if we had had the vote last night, that the cloture vote that we had today would have failed. And that would have fit very nicely into the majority leaders and the president's desire to change the subject from Obamacare to Republicans blocking this unemployment compensation bill. Well, it didn't turn out that way because we had the vote here this morning, and we embrace the opportunity to talk about our pro-growth alternatives, which will actually make life better for the American people, not worse, as the policies of this administration have over the last 5 years. Well, basically, we know that the demand is this: to extend long-term unemployment benefits beyond the half year, which is the basic program, another 3 months, and to put the entire $6.5 billion tab on our national credit card. But I ask you, what's going to happen after 3 months? Will the President and his allies be back asking for another 3 months and another $6.5 billion in deficit spending that will be added to the debt? I think so. How about in 9 months? If we extend it for 2 3-month extensions, we'll be here for another one that will extend it to 9 months and beyond. Ad infinitum. $25 billion on added deficits and debt spending, unless we solve the root of the problem. Republicans would prefer that we offset any real extension with spending cuts that would make it revenue neutral. We'd also like to reform the unemployment insurance program so it delivers better results to the unemployed. For example, if there's one thing that most people who are unemployed need, it's the opportunity for job skills training. And we ought to make sure that things like Pell Grants are available for people during that 26-week period of time that they're on unemployment, that they can go to a community college in their own town and learn new job skills so they don't have to be stuck in the same old position. They can learn new job skills, which will open up a whole world of new opportunities for them when it comes to jobs. Well, before I conclude, I just want to mention a few numbers that help put the Obama economy in perspective. According to the Joint Economic Committee, the economy grew during the first 4 years of the Reagan administration by 22.3%. 22.3%. During the first 4 years of the Obama administration, it was about 9%, less than half. Why is that? Why is that? That the economy grew during the first 4 years of the Reagan administration by 22%, in the first 4 years of the Obama administration about 9.2%. Well, I think, as I pointed out, there's some good reasons why this recovery has been anemic and so slow, and why so many people are still struggling to try to find work. If the Obama recovery had been as strong as the Reagan recovery, we would have millions more private sector jobs. Isn't that what we want? We don't want people, nor do the recipients of unemployed insurance compensation want to receive a government check. What they want is the dignity and the self-confidence and the opportunity to provide for their family that comes with a good job. And that's what's missing in this whole equation and this transparent political exercise to play gotcha at their expense. We know that it was President Reagan's economic strategies, combined with permanent broad-based tax cuts and sensible regulatory policies, that helped grow the economy. By contrast, President Obama's strategy has combined massive tax increases, including the payroll tax last January, a year ago January, with the regulatory bonanza. And we don't have to speculate about what the impact of President Obama's policies are. We are living with them today. So I would say to President Obama, if you really want to reduce income inequality and promote upward mobility, we want to have that conversation. Let's get back to the policies, though, that have worked so well in the past, not those which have failed us and the American people during the last 5 years. Let's put a stop to regulations that don't pass a cost-benefit test. Let's do what we need to expand domestic energy production and create jobs. You know where the two lowest unemployment rates in the country are? Bismarck, North Dakota, and Midland, Texas. And that's because of the shale energy renaissance that has created jobs. If you can pass a commercial driver's license test, you can get a job driving a truck with a high school degree in both of those places and earn between $75,000 and $100,000 a year. Lowest unemployment in the country. But this administration's policies have made it harder and harder for those jobs to be created, along with the Keystone Pipeline and the jobs that that would create. So we need to also reform our tax code to encourage more investment. We need to reward earned success so that small businesses can be started, so existing small businesses can expand. And all of the President's policies, including, of course, most notably Obamacare, have made that harder. We need to do what we can, as I said, to expand domestic energy production and create jobs. And we need to reform unemployment insurance and get more people back into the workforce by making sure that they have the job training that they need to learn employable skills. And then, of course, the subject that will not go away, notwithstanding the President's most earnest desire, and that is we need to dismantle Obamacare before it does any more harm to our health care system and our broader economy. And we need to replace it with more affordable coverage that lets consumers keep the doctor they trust. A promise that Obamacare made, but a promise that has been broken, as too many people already know. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Gentleman yield. Gentleman yield for a moment. Madam President.
The senator from Ohio.
I was just walking through the chamber, and I had the opportunity to visit with some of my colleagues in the back, and I heard what my colleague from Texas was saying, and I just want to add a couple of things if I could. One, to say that he's absolutely right in terms of the underlying problem here, which is a weak economy. And really an historically weak economy. Never coming out of a recession have we had a recovery this weak. And you made that point well, that typically we go into a recession in sort of a V formation. We go in and come back out with a relatively strong recovery if it's a relatively deep recession. That certainly happened in 1981, where at this point in Ronald Reagan's recovery, we had created over 8 million new jobs. And unfortunately, we're not creating the new jobs that we've created in these other recoveries. And as a result, we do have this problem with folks who are both unemployed and long-term unemployed. And I think it's important to note that we now have historic levels of long-term unemployed. People have been out of work for more than a half year, more than 26 weeks, highest levels ever. And so something's not working. It's different this time. And I think what's not working is that some of our basic structural institutions like our tax system, our regulatory system, the regulations that have come with Obamacare and so on are adding more and more burdens to the economy. And the historic debt and deficit that you talk about also is adding to our economic woes. It's hurting the economy today, and it's certainly unfair, I would say even immoral, to put that burden on future generations. Some of the young people who are here today are going to get left holding the bag for the $17 trillion national debt we now have, $145,000 for every family in Texas or Ohio. So the gentleman makes the right points. We've got to get this economy moving. And there are some very specific policy proposals that you have outlined that we ought to turn to. The President has talked about tax reform. He's talked about regulatory relief, but he hasn't delivered. And if we don't get at those issues, we're not going to ultimately solve the problem. But here we find ourselves within a few hours of having voted to proceed on a debate on whether we do extend unemployment insurance for people for the next 3 months beyond the normal unemployment that would be out there. Most states provide about 6 months unemployment insurance. About 26 weeks. Some states a little more, some states a little less. We're talking about is how much do you add at the federal level as emergency unemployment benefits. And I did vote, along with some of my other colleagues on both sides of the aisle, to proceed to this debate. And as the gentleman said earlier, I heard him, perhaps that wasn't what the majority leader was hoping for, because maybe he wanted more of a political issue. But I did so because I took to heart what was said on the other side of the aisle about the fact that we're going to now have a debate. And I think this debate breaks down into a couple of things. One is, how do you deal with paying for this? Because, as we indicated, this economy is not going to grow until we deal with these historic levels of debt and deficit. How ironic would it be if we were saying we're going to help those who are unemployed by making it harder to get the economy moving, by not doing anything with regard to the debt and deficit, in fact, adding to it. So what I'm going to be filing as an amendment is a very simple amendment that says let's pay for this extension for 6 months. And I just heard my colleague from Texas saying that he would support that. Others, I hope on both sides, will support this. The specific idea that we have is let's take a proposal out of the President's budget that says if you're on Social Security disability and therefore not working, you, of course, shouldn't be getting unemployment insurance. That's in the President's budget. I would also say trade adjustment assistance, of course, shouldn't be available to you because you're not working by definition. So it's basically tightening up some of the provisions in current law to make them work better. That provides the funding to be able to say, okay, let's go ahead and extend unemployment insurance, but only for a few months while we do sit down and work on these bigger problems that the gentleman from Texas has taken a lead on and talked about today. And I hope that's where we will end up, is it will actually pay for this rather than adding to the burden and making the economy even weaker by adding to our deficit. Second, I think we need to have an honest discussion, even in the next couple of days here, as to how to make the unemployment system itself work better. Unemployment insurance, as has been noted, is not connecting people to jobs. And that's the reason we have these historic levels of long-term unemployed. You mentioned the Pell Grants, for instance, being available to people who are on unemployment insurance. That's incredibly important. But also having our worker retraining programs at the federal level work better for those folks who are uninsured. And I think we should engage in that topic now, not only on how do we pay for this, but how do we actually make the unemployment insurance system work for the people who are unemployed. The federal government spends over $15 billion a year in the worker retraining programs, 47 programs spread over 9 different departments and agencies. Often the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. The GAO, which looks at these issues, the General Accountability Office, has said that there is duplication in most of these programs, and only a handful, 4 or 5, are seeing the kind of performance measures you would want to have in a federal program. So a great opportunity here on a bipartisan basis for us to get those worker retraining programs working better into the hands of the people who really need the retraining to match skills with jobs. In Ohio, and I'm sure the same is true in Texas, we have a lot of jobs going wanting right now. We've got about 100,000 jobs available. We've got about 400,000 people out of work. How do you connect those? A big part of that is providing the skills to those workers to be able to access those jobs that are available that do require a higher skill. Maybe it's advanced manufacturing. Maybe it's biotechnology. The federal government is not providing that help right now. Those worker retraining skills that are needed are not being provided. So I do think there's an opportunity here for us to pay for this, to be sure we're not heading to the debt and deficit at a time when the economy is too weak already, and second, to provide the skills workers need, Pell Grants, and so on, to actually give people some hope and give people some additional tools to be able to access this economy and these jobs that are available and get this economy moving again. I thank the gentleman for allowing me to yield.
Before the distinguished senator from Ohio leaves the floor, and I didn't know he was coming down, but I'm delighted he did. Not only is he an expert in former director of the Office of Management and Budget, distinguished member of the House, but now the Senate, a great new addition since 2010. He understands these issues, particularly the fiscal issues, better than most of us. But he makes a very important point. I'm worried, based on what the majority leader did last night, that they preferred to have a gotcha moment, have the bill fail at the very outset, rather than have a fulsome debate and a realistic discussion about what the alternatives are to basically permanently paying people not to work through virtually a permanent extension of unemployment. But more than most people, the senator from Ohio, when he came to this chamber, said what we need is a jobs program. And so he advocated among those in our Republican conference, said we need a positive program for how do how do we facilitate the economy, the private sector creating those jobs? And, of course, he described the amendment that he intends to offer on this bill, not only to pay for this 3-month extension, which would be a welcome measure, but also to reform the unemployment system so that people's can learn skills that actually match them up with the jobs that do exist. But I would just add, while the senator is on the floor, that as he knows, there's a lot of other really good ideas that will be offered this week by this side of the aisle, but it's entirely dependent upon the majority leader allowing that sort of fulsome debate and those ideas to come to the floor and be available for a vote. Things like the 40-hour work week act that Senator Collins has promoted, the medical device tax, which I talked about, the repeal sponsored, chief sponsor is Senator Hatch of Utah. Senator Barrasso from New Mexico has got one that would repeal the health insurance tax from Obamacare, which is a direct pass-through to consumers. Senator Paul, Senator McConnell have their economic freedom zones idea to help blighted areas where unemployment is high and to create a way for the private sector to be incentivized to come in and start jobs and to create opportunity. We've got regulatory reform bills and proposals. We've got the Keystone XL pipeline idea. I know Senator Lee and Senator Rubio have both recently come up with some very visionary ideas about how do we fight the war on poverty in a realistic sort of way. But my point is that whether we're going to get into that debate and give a full and fair consideration of all of these ideas about how to solve this problem really depend on the majority leader allowing amendments to be offered and voted on. And I would just ask the senator from Ohio what his expectation is in that regard and what the consequences would be if the majority leader decides to deny any amendments and basically shut down this process.
Well, I appreciate the gentleman yielding, and I would say that having listened to some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle speak earlier today prior to the vote about what their intentions were, including one of the authors of the legislation and one of the leaders in the Senate, it seems to me that they are interested in a debate, and they encourage those of us on the Republican side to vote yes on the motion to proceed with that understanding that there would be the opportunity then to at least discuss these issues and therefore offer amendments and to have what the Senate typically has had over the years, which is the opportunity for some give and take and the opportunity to have the voices heard of people representing both the states on the Democrat side and the Republican side of the aisle. So I'm hopeful we'll have that debate. That's my expectation. Again, I plan to file an amendment to pay for the unemployment insurance extension, which I know a lot of support will come from both sides of the aisle for that. I also hope to be able to offer other amendments that have to do with growing the economy in a more direct way. You mentioned regulatory reform, for instance. We've got bipartisan proposals on this side of the aisle that are intended to take the unemployment situation and deal with it in a broader context of reducing the burdens on small businesses, for instance. When you try to get a permit, for instance, in the federal government right now, sometimes with an energy project, sometimes there are as many as 34 different permits you have to obtain. This is one reason we're not seeing investment in some of the energy projects we'd like to see. It's a great potential for our economy right now, and we can make it the potential even greater and achieve it if we can do something on the regulatory reform side. So these are all issues that ought to be part of the broader discussion here as to how to increase economic growth and therefore to increase jobs and opportunity for people who find themselves unemployed and are looking for those job skills and looking for those jobs that are open. So I look forward to that debate over the next few days. That's certainly my expectation, and I would hope the members on both sides would come down to the well and offer their amendments, have them voted on up or down in the great tradition of the United States Senate.
I thank the senator for responding to that question. I would just point out in conclusion, Madam President, that this bill extends unemployment benefits for 3 months at a cost of $6.5 billion right now, which is unpaid for. But if the senators from Ohio's amendment is adopted, there's a solution to that problem, along with reform of the job training components of our current unemployment compensation system. But if we're unable to have this broader debate, we'll find ourselves right back here in 3 more months, because none of the underlying problems, of which high unemployment and low growth are symptoms, will have been addressed. And so what I hope, and I would love to be optimistic about the majority leader's willingness to allow those amendments and allow those votes and have that fulsome debate. If he does not, then we've had a 3-month patch, and we'll be right back here with the same problems confronting us, the underlying symptoms of an anemic economy with slow economic growth and high unemployment. Madam President, I yield the floor. Madam President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Say aye.
Lawmakers this afternoon, as they have been most of the day, discussing today's Senate vote to move forward with debate on the jobless benefits bill. The vote happened earlier today. The tally, 60 yeas, 37 nays, just enough to approve further debate. 60 votes were needed, and 6 Republicans voted with Democrats on the measure. We are expecting more debate on unemployment this afternoon. A vote on final passage could happen this week. It is a bipartisan bill crafted by Democratic Senator Jack Reed and Republican Dean Heller of Nevada. The challenge for Republican lawmakers is finding a way to pay for the bill that satisfies constituents. While we wait to hear more on the Senate floor, Senate Democratic leaders had these remarks after today's vote.
Good morning. The United States Senate just took a very important step forward in assisting 1.3 million Americans who lost their extended unemployment benefits on December 28th, and also the millions more that will lose it throughout the course of this year. There's still a great deal of work to be done, but we have literally changed this debate. Just a few weeks ago, there were colleagues who were talking about unemployment insurance as a disservice to the American worker. Today we're talking about the vital nature of this program and also the need to extend it. And now we're also talking about should it be paid for in the long term? Are there other changes that could be made? We made several changes in 2012. And so we're moving forward. We have to collaborate. We have to be constructive. But today, I think we've given a bit of hope to millions of Americans who are struggling in a difficult economy to find jobs, who are struggling to provide sustenance to their families, to pay the heat bill, to put some gas in the car, and to keep looking for work. We also understand that this is just providing sort of the immediate assistance people need. The longer term is to create the jobs, to build the economy where these programs are not as necessary as they are today. I certainly, this was
the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam President, I rise today on behalf of over 37,000 unemployed Nebraskans and the nearly 21 million Americans who are searching for work. The vast majority of these men and women are jobless through no fault of their own. They are the real-life casualties of failed Washington policies. They are our friends, our neighbors, and in many cases, they are our family members. They are decent people, and they are desperate to regain the dignity of a full day of labor. We've had 5 years of economic fits and starts, glimmers of hope dashed by the harsh reality of persistent economic headwinds. But the weak job reports and the Pollyanna claims of recovery don't tell the full story. Our real unemployment rate, or the total percentage of unemployed and underemployed workers, tops 13%, significantly higher than the 7% reported by the Department of Labor in November. That's nearly 21 million people out of work. At the same time, our labor force participation rate is at 63%. That is a near 35-year low. The greatness of a nation cannot endure without work for its people. It's not just about putting food on the table. It's about the ability of families to buy a home, to save for their kids' college education, and to retire with a modest nest egg. It's about hard-working moms and dads in need of the simple assurance that their government isn't going to pass laws that intentionally make life harder for them. I'm interested in promoting thoughtful economic policies that increase employment opportunities and make life just a little bit easier for our people. But instead of a laser focus on job creation, politicians in Washington seem to pivot from issue to issue, frantically chasing the topic du jour. Jobless Americans aren't interested in who's to blame. They're interested in who's going to fix this mess and how. And so the Congress has returned to Washington for a new year, a new chance to take on daunting challenges like joblessness in America. We've all been informed by the media that the so-called wise men of Washington, that in 2014, that's going to be a year where very little is accomplished. The pundits point to election year politicking, and some members are fretting about taking those very tough votes. There's no will for action, they say. There's no chance for any kind of compromise, they claim. Well, the 21 million Americans without a job are counting on us to do our job. They expect and they demand that we do better. Promoting policies to create jobs is not election year rhetoric. It is the duty of the people's government. The best way to support the unemployed is not just to extend the benefits. We need to grow the economy. We need to provide paychecks for families. Lately, there's been a lot of talk about income inequality, or the need to bridge the gap between rich and poor. Some argue that deficit spending is the way to go, while others insist on increasing the minimum wage. Arthur Brooks, the president of the American Enterprise Institute, offers a different take on how to best conquer the income divide. In a July 31, 2013 opinion piece published in the Wall Street Journal, Brooks notes, quote, "Again and again the President offers a higher minimum wage as a solution. Yet as the overwhelming majority of economists have argued for decades, the minimum wage actually harms the poorest and most marginalized workers, those with the most tenuous grip on their jobs. In January, a study from the National Bureau of Economic Research surveyed the most recent studies and concluded the evidence still shows that minimum wages pose a trade-off of higher wages for some against job losses for others." Brooks continues, "The story for strivers and entrepreneurs is no better. Scott Shane of Case Western Reserve University has shown that business formation fell by 17.3% between 2007 and 2009. Launching a business is never a walk in the park, especially given the explosion of red tape at all levels of government. While it is still possible for the educated and comfortable, government bureaucracy can crush entrepreneurship entirely for those at the bottom of the income scale. As a pro-poor rule of thumb, I suggest this. If you want to start a landscaping business, all you should need is a lawnmower, not an accountant and a lawyer to help you hack through all the red tape before setting up shop." Close quote. I think Brooks is right. Regulatory overreach is also holding back American business. Regulations can be helpful. They ensure the health and the safety of Americans. However, overregulation places unnecessary burdens on small business owners, and it does stifle economic growth. A home builder in Nebraska once told me that he was fined $7,000 for leaning a ladder up against a wall. There is solid legislation out there to address this rampant red tape. Here's just a few examples. The Regulatory Responsibility for Economy of 2013. This is a bill that was introduced by Senator Pat Roberts that I'm co-sponsoring. It requires the executive branch to repeal duplicative and onerous rules currently hindering our nation's job creators. It also requires federal agencies to modify, to streamline, or to repeal significant regulatory actions that are unnecessary or overly burdensome. The legislation ensures that regulations put forth by the administration account for their economic impact on American businesses. It ensures stakeholder input and promotes innovation. These simple, common-sense policies are a good start towards relieving business owners of some of the unnecessary challenges they face in these already difficult economic times. I believe, and I know many Nebraskans believe, that executive agencies should be held accountable for the rules that they put in place, which directly affect our economic growth and our job creation. Another key way that we can spur economic growth is through broad-based tax reform. Our current tax system is arcane, ridden with loopholes for special interests from the 80s. It's time that we simplify our tax code so that we can encourage pro-growth behavior. Whenever I travel my state and I meet with Nebraska's business owners, both large and small, I hear the same message over and over. We need more certainty. We need more certainty. They need more certainty in the tax code, they need more certainty in health care, and they need more certainty in the regulatory environment. A business cannot grow today if it cannot adequately predict its needs for tomorrow. This is especially true for small business owners, who are responsible for 64% of all net new private sector jobs. Jobs will come when these entrepreneurs have confidence that the bureaucrats are going to get off their back. Jobs won't come from just another D.C. government program. And so I believe that we must shift the focus of economic growth from government-driven regulation to private sector innovation. The great government-controlled experiment has failed us again. and so it's time for a change, of course. There's no shortage of good ideas out there. My colleagues and I have introduced dozens of bills to directly address job creation by repealing specific regulations, by preventing new burdensome mandates, and encouraging a fair tax system. But so far, we haven't had any form of meaningful debate. Why? Why can't we debate in this body in a meaningful way? Well, I believe it's because we are restricted in this Senate by what we can actually vote on. It's a radical form of control, and I am tired of it. Rather than allowing an open amendment process, the majority leader has locked this place down. We hear constant calls to end obstruction. But if we're being honest, we would all acknowledge that the primary obstruction here is in the broken, non-existent amendment process. As my friend and colleague, Senator Coburn, recently noted in the Wall Street Journal, quote, Mr. Reid had already used Senate rules to cut off debate and prevent the minority from offering amendments 78 times, more than all other Senate majority leaders combined. Why? It appears designed to advance a partisan political agenda, show votes in an election year. In other words, let's airdrop bills on the floor and prevent any form of modification or improvement. That seems to be just routine business around here these days, and it is shameful. It's my hope that in this new year, all thoughtful ideas will get a vote. It is my hope that in this new year, we'll actually get a chance to amend bills. That's the only way that we can actually pass legislation to improve the lives of the American people. I look forward to putting forth my own proposals to fulfill my duty to the people of Nebraska to get our friends and our neighbors back to work. Rather than focusing on issues that divide us, I hope that my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, will come together to support policies that promote opportunities for all. Showboats might make for good election year politics, but make no mistake, they are bad policy. And unfortunately, it is we the people who pay the steep price for politics over policy. I am excited for another year here in the United States Senate where I can represent my friends and neighbors, Nebraskans from back home. And I look forward to helping put Americans back to work in the year ahead. Our citizens, Mr. President, send us here to do a job, and they're counting on us. So let's not let them down. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. You and I earlier today were part of a historic majority, a very bipartisan majority that voted 60 to 37 to extend unemployment insurance for millions of Americans across this country who are struggling to make ends meet, keep their families together, keep a roof over their heads, basic essentials, not only to continue living, but to continue searching for work. These Americans are not without a work ethic. In fact, they are devastated by being out of work for so long with such destructive results for their sense of self-worth and their families. This measure is limited in its scope and significance. It is only a procedural vote on a temporary measure for 3 months and only a partial solution to the grave and pressing issue of putting America back to work, restoring employment for Americans who want to work and keep their families together. But it is profoundly important. And I want to thank my colleagues, Senators Reid of Rhode Island and Heller of Nevada, as well as all of our colleagues who voted for it, and even many of my colleagues who may have voted against it but were torn and hopefully will vote for it on final passage. And I urge all of my colleagues to get this job done so that we can send it to the House of Representatives and make sure that it is approved there. What is significant about this measure is, in fact, it was bipartisan. It was overwhelming. It shows Congress is listening, that it is heeding the calls for action from those 1.3 million Americans, including 5,700 of them in my own state of Connecticut, who need this measure so that they can continue seeking work, hopefully successfully. It is a temporary fix, but it is a measure with profound significance for those men and women who courageously are facing the searing facts of life during long-term joblessness. One of them, in fact, very courageously was with the President earlier today, Catherine Hackett of Connecticut, Moodus, Connecticut, a parent of 2 sons in the military, who herself is struggling to keep the heat on and put food on her table. And she described her situation in introducing President Obama when he spoke about this problem earlier today. I am proud that she is at the forefront of this fight, and I am proud to be fighting with her so that Americans have the benefit of unemployment insurance when they are employed for longer than the 26 weeks that is recognized under the statute. This story is one of numbers. We can't deny the statistics. The Great Recession may have ended for a lot of Americans, but it continues for the unemployed, the jobless, particularly long-term jobless. And those numbers have become almost mind-numbing, but they are very, very significant. According to a report recently released by the Joint Economic Committee, 3 years after the recession ending in 1991, long-term unemployment was at 1.3%. 3 years after the recession ending in 2001, long-term unemployment was also at 1.3%. Today, long-term unemployment is double those numbers at 2.6%. Here we are, 4 years after the supposed end of the recession in 2009, double the number of long-term unemployed in previous recessions. Our economy simply is not growing fast enough or creating enough jobs to end that persistently high rate of long-term unemployment. About 4 million Americans, more than a third of unemployed Americans, have been looking for work for 6 months or more. In my home state of Connecticut, long-term unemployment has become even more prevalent among those who have lost their jobs. In fact, 43.6%, or almost half, of Connecticut's overall unemployed population are long-term unemployed. By the end of this year, that number is likely to be 80,000 people. But those numbers really are less convincing and compelling than the human stories. And I was really proud and moved to sit with a number of my fellow Connecticut citizens, hardworking, dedicated people of all ages, some of them who have spent lifetimes working for a single employer, only to find themselves rejected and released. Many of them told me that they expected to find work right away, within a couple of weeks. And here they are, more than 6 months later, many of them still struggling to find work and working to improve their skills so that they can match the job opportunities that may exist. Ross Dicker, who has been out of work for almost a year, is a former health insurance project manager who has also experience with health care reform implementation in Massachusetts, our neighboring state. Rosa has sent out 500 job applications in the past year. I almost misstated that figure. I thought it was 50. It's 500 job applications in the past year, and been granted how many interviews? An interview 3 times. Nirsa Cruz, an experienced social worker with a master's degree who also has been employed since early 2013, and despite hours and hours that she's devoted to countless job applications, she's been unable to find work. Michael Kubica, unemployed after years of experience in the insurance and publishing industries, went back to school to pursue an MBA. And yet, despite his educational experience, despite his degrees, despite his dedication, unable to secure temporary, more than temporary holiday season work. Anyone who suggests that the long-term unemployed are somehow content or have decided to stay out of work or have abandoned the search ought to talk to people in their own communities, people like Rosa, Nirsa, Michael, who have struggled and worked to find suitable jobs. They are driven, passionate, and absolutely dedicated. One woman I met, Erin London, described it this way. My whole family, she said, my whole family is impacted. My son asks, am I going to be able to go to college? I don't know how to answer. I don't want him to know I am scared. Imagine yourself as a parent thinking, and we've all thought it, I don't want him or her to know I am scared. Another Connecticut woman, Alicia Nesbitt, is proud to be working and to have worked continuously since the age of 16 until she was unemployed. And now she depends on food stamps and heating assistance. These stories are powerful and compelling, even more so than the numbers and statistics, shocking as they are. And I hope that we will heed those human stories when we come back tomorrow and the next day to vote on this bill. In the long term, we need measures like tax reform and skill training so that people can be matched with jobs, so that we prepare for the jobs of the future. Pathways Back to Work is a bill that I've introduced that supports creation of new jobs as well as training for the ones that exist. I've introduced it with my colleagues, Senator Murphy and Gillibrand, and I think it would do a great deal to address the fundamental underlying challenges that are keeping unemployed people from reconnecting with the world of work. But these measures are for next week or the week after. Right now, the urgency of this week is passing a measure that is fundamentally important to keep people moving forward, searching for work, and to keep our economy moving forward. Those folks who receive unemployment insurance use it to buy clothes or food or cars, that drives the economy, provides for the kind of consumer demand we need to enable our economy to continue moving forward. So we're helping these folks avoid the precipice of poverty and homelessness, which makes their job search even more difficult. We're also helping our economy. And all of us who want job creation and economic progress and want it to be our nation's priority and success. I'm proud to stand here and join Senators Reid and Heller and thank also our Majority Leader, Senator Reid, for their leadership, because our most urgent task is to move our economy forward, provide these unemployment benefits as soon as possible, and then look toward more permanent measures, skill training, pathways back to work, veterans programs that will enable all Americans to enjoy more equally the benefits of the greatest nation in the history of the world. The challenge of our growing inequality is also our growing inequity. And this measure is a start, a temporary, limited start in the right direction toward making America fulfill its great promise for the future. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today for a new beginning.